On this Buyer's Corner episode, we're speaking with Mike Magliochetti, operating partner at the Riverside Company, a global private equity firm with nearly 4 decades of experience investing exclusively in healthcare and tech-enabled healthcare services. Let's begin. Thanks, Mike, for joining us.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
To set the stage, can you briefly share your professional background and the firm you represent today? And also, on the same note, you made a leap from a serial CEO to an operating partner in private equity. How was that?
Yeah, I've been an operating partner here at Riverside for 14 years. Hard to believe, longest I've been anywhere in my career. But my background is very different than my partners. I originally trained as a chemical engineer, have a PhD in chemical engineering, and then earlier in my career was sent to get an MBA. And shortly thereafter, my career sort of took a path of more of general management, and had the good fortune over 20 years before joining Riverside to serve as CEO of 3 companies through successful sale transactions, one in urology gynecology, another in orthopedics, and my last in oncology diagnostics, a company called Claros. It was while I was at Claros that I met Riverside. I was introduced just by a mutual friend to the managing partner, and we clicked right away, and he asked me if I wanted to join Riverside's Healthcare Advisory Board, which is a real differentiated group of executives from all the different subsectors in which Riverside plays to really help the firm with diligence on opportunities, serve as an independent board member here and there, and just add value. It didn't seem like too heavy of a lift. While I was CEO of Claros, they were in Boston, I was in Boston, and they had a terrific reputation. So I decided to go ahead and do it. And fast forward 4 years, my company Claros was acquired. I stayed along to run the global diagnostics business for the acquirer, Opco Health, and I did that for a little over a year, and had the opportunity. Riverside reached out and asked if I wanted to really change up my career and join full time as a partner. I knew that I had the chemistry box checked. I had been working with them for 5 years. I saw how they treated each other. I saw how they treated the management teams of the companies they invested in, and so I knew that would make sense for me. It was just really going from player to coach, which can be very different. And so I gave myself a year to see if I'd like it or not. And you pick your head up, and 14 years goes by, and I guess lesson learned is if you like what you do and who you do, time just goes by.
I understand that you recently published a book, Dancing Between the Toes of Elephants. Clever private equity idioms and anecdotes from an outsider's experience on the inside. Can you share a bit about how the book originated and a bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you, anytime I was blessed to be offered a CEO role over those 20 years before joining Riverside, whether it was in urology, orthopedics, oncology. Funny, I never felt I was qualified, not because of imposter syndrome, but just because of the fact that, for example, I got tapped to run an orthopedics company, and I hadn't spent a day in orthopedics in my career. It was just, I had returned money for shareholders. I was bilingual in the sense I could understand technology and also finance. But what it meant to me was a very, very steep learning curve. Imagine having to go toe to toe with an orthopedic surgeon very early in your tenure on a value proposition that was either patient, clinical, or financial. You needed to be more than an inch deep and a mile wide. So I had a process that I used in these new assignments where when I was going through these learning curves, I would always listen 3 times before I spoke. I would be deferential to those around me who had lots of experience in the space. And I would never let something be said where I didn't understand what it meant. I would always ask a lot of questions and completely immerse myself in these companies. For the first 6 months and maybe for the entire tenure of the CEO assignment, the whole concept of work-life balance was out the window. So, and you pay a price for that, right? But that's what worked for me. But when I made the move to private equity, when I joined Riverside, even though I had PE, VC, family office investors in my companies in the past, I had had an MBA, all that good stuff. I've been an advisor for 4 or 5 years to Riverside. It was still a steep learning curve, tremendous learning curve for me. Imagine getting into this ecosystem where you're surrounded by folks. That's all they've really done, And so I used that same process as I did as a new CEO, but I did something a little bit different this time. I kept a journal. And anytime one of my colleagues used a phrase that I didn't quite understand or an idiom that I thought was really clever and unique, and maybe I'd roll my eyes at how absurd it was, I wrote it down. I wrote down what it was, what it meant, how it was used, and a little bit of a blurb about it, if you will. And I kept this as a living document over the years, meeting other PE firms, going to conferences, meeting with investment bankers. And over the years, I've been fortunate to present at different colleges and universities on my kind of unique journey into private equity. And a college professor on a visit had asked me, how the heck did someone with a PhD in chemical engineering ever wind up in private equity? And I shared with him, sort of my journey and this tool that I used that helped me acclimate, this journal. And he kind of really stopped in his tracks and he said to me, many of my students will work for private equity or venture capital firms. Many of them will work for companies that are funded by private equity and venture capital. You should really think about turning that journal into a manuscript for a book. Well, long story short, I ended up, getting network. This was around late 2022. I started writing. 2 years later, I went over this time from paper to Word document. 2 years later, I had about 350 pages. Nothing about publishing. Managed through the superpower of networking to connect with agents. One of whom represented me, and the book was published. Dancing Between Closed Developments late last year, and through many influencers who took to the book achieved #1 bestseller status and Amazon #1 bestseller status for 3 categories: private equity, venture capital, and career professional development. So it's been an amazing whirlwind, if you will. I really enjoy the people that I'm meeting, the feedback I'm getting on the book from executives that work for PE and venture funded companies, from students. I've done over 25 events in a few months, and while still trying to balance my role at Riverside, which is no small task. So it's been incredible.
In your book, you talk about navigating large, complex organizations while building a bridge between executive leadership teams and the investments firms with whom they partner. How does that thinking translate into your acquisition mandate today? Are there specific sectors, business models, or growth profiles you actively seek? Or do you take a more opportunistic approach?
Yeah. We have a very, very targeted approach. Riverside quickly was founded 37 years ago. And since day one, we've been focused in healthcare and technology. Today, we're 100% healthcare. Any technology that we do is tech-enabled healthcare services. It has to have that healthcare overlay. And the companies that we invest in, these are companies that aren't taking binary risk. We're not investing in companies that have reimbursement or regulatory risk, pure play pharma, molecules, hospitals, clinics, physician practices. We're investing in companies that provide services to those who do take the binary risk. So what that equates to is, front to back end revenue cycle management services, coding, machine learning for revenue cycle management types of businesses, pharma services, manufacturing, contract manufacturing for devices, diagnostics, medical pharmaceuticals. There's not a whole heck of a lot we won't look at under that umbrella, but these are good companies. They'd be good companies whether or not they met us. But just at a point in their life cycle where the founder has a good deal of sweat equity tied up into the business, maybe a good deal of their net worth concentrated in the company. We want to take some liquidity, want to take some chips off the table, and keep a healthy percentage of equity with us going forward. in the 37 years, we've never made an investment where the founder hasn't stayed engaged in the company in some way, shape, or form, whether that's remaining as CEO or taking a different role or being on the board of directors, and kept a healthy percentage of equity in the company. We won't make an investment if that's not the case. We just won't do it. And these are companies, when we invest, that are generating revenues. I guess in PE speak, it's lower middle market revenues that generate even between, say, 3 and 12 million, in that range. We can go above that, but that's typically where we like to play. And these are companies, they typically have, good foundational management teams, sustainable businesses, and a real right to win, real differentiation with respect to sustainability and right to win, and growth levers, both organic and inorganic.
You mentioned a bit about growth for the companies. At what stage of growth do you typically find companies most attractive for acquisition, and why?
Yeah, these, like I said, these are good companies, right? It's all about execution for us. We see, we see a pattern recognition, oftentimes where, the founders, those who are really self-aware will come to us and say, I've taken this business to 25 million. You've got a PhD computer scientist or biochemist, and they're taking the company to a certain level, and they don't know how to take it. They know what it should look like, but they're not sure what it takes to get it from 25 to 125 or 225 million in revenue. So very often, it's all about intelligent execution and that pattern recognition, where we have a 37-year playbook to be able to engage and add value. So oftentimes we find ourselves with these businesses filling gaps in the executive leadership team, building out business development. These companies oftentimes are growing 10, 15+% a year with no formal business development function. It's just based on client to client referrals and on the shoulders of the founders network, which is a great thing. But for us, the value creation comes in where, this is an area I love to engage and build out a business development function, bring on a chief commercial officer, inside sales, field sales, account management, and the tools and processes that go along with that, like implementing a CRM system or, cross-functionally an ERP or LIMS system, all to sort of professionalize the organization. And once we feel comfortable about the people, the platform, the sustainability, we'll look to do, add-on acquisitions to get a business into different geographies, different technologies, maybe diversification of clients or services. So there's a lot of, these growth levers, the ability for us to be able to plug in and work with the team, help build a team and work with the team to take this company to a whole nother level, maybe a level that the founder dreamed about, is really, really exciting for us.
Sounds really, really insightful, Mike. You have a really good vantage point as both an acquirer and as an author, too. So, has the tech M&A landscape evolved over the last few years? What elephants do buyers and sellers need to learn how to dance with in today's market? And what trends do you see ahead?
Yeah, it's interesting. What I've seen, because it's been more and more difficult for lower middle market private equity firms to raise capital. It's been tough over the past few years. So I've seen sort of a real increase in the scrutiny on sustainability and TAM and the growth prospects for these businesses. We along with our other PE firms that I've interacted with, much more disciplined. Not that we were lax or cavalier in any way, but there's a real a shift to a greater selectivity and a premium on differentiation and real durable growth. What I've seen over the past few years, and it's continuing, is these companies that I described, these companies that are positioned with strong management teams, sustainable businesses, growth levers, differentiation, these A assets, if you will, they're demanding a premium. They're trading at high multiples, investment banker-led processes, quick shot clocks on diligence, if you will. And really, really high valuations. The companies that are sort of the B assets or have hair on them, as I say in my book, they're either not trading or they're trading for lower multiples with lots of structure, earnouts, seller notes, and things like that. So that's what I've been seeing, over the past several years, and it's just that trend is just continuing.
Yeah, that sounds extremely challenging. On that note, from the buyer's perspective, what part of the acquisition process is most challenging? And how does that align with the leadership and decision-making lessons you highlight in your book?
Yeah, it's a great question. The challenge is there's a couple things here to unpack. That having the seller comprehend the difference, first of all, between a private equity buyer and a strategic buyer. They're both very, very different paths for the seller. And just kind of thinking about the PE side, the founders and management teams have to realize the challenge is having them realize that not all PE firms are created equal. Everyone will come to the table saying they have capital, they have tenure in the space, they have great returns. That's just table stakes. It's really the challenge is having the seller understand, for them to realize, what is day one going to look like with this partner, with this new partner? What's day 100, day 1000 going to look like? Because this is you're taking on a partner. It's probably the most important decision in the life cycle of the company. You're taking on a partner. This is a marriage, but it's a marriage that you can't get out of. Valuation is important. I know it's a challenge to think through, to move away from the highest upfront valuation. I think there's much more to it than that. One has to think about sort of that second bite out of the apple, because the real win for the seller isn't the first check. It's that after 3, 4, 5 years taking on a partner, a PE firm partner, what partner are you going to want to be in the foxhole with for the next several years, and who is going to add the most value to get that largest largest end result in terms of that second liquidity event. And too many entrepreneurs, they fixate on that headline upfront valuation, and they overlook complicated deal structures that can come behind it, and really the organizational behavior of the PE firm in which they're partnering with. Another thing too is, I think, challenging is, sellers should understand, they need to do what they say they're going to do in terms of hitting their numbers pre-close. For us as investors, we look at a confidential information memorandum. It has a management financial case and the timeline to close. During that timeline, they should ensure that they're hitting their numbers. That forecast should have the credibility behind it that they can hit. And also, I think it can be frustrating sometimes when you're under tight timelines to close, but the seller's not prepared. They're not responsive. They don't have a rock solid data room where they can quickly give you the information you need to complete your diligence. So it's having them realize how important the decision making is to bring on that PE partner and who they bring on, and really being prepared for that journey.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's one of the big lessons that you give in your book. Can you give some highlights to our listeners about some lessons learned and advice for new private equity-backed CEOs from your book?
That's so important. Such an important question, and I kind of look at least in the sliver of private equity that we play in, these lower middle market, founder, majority management owned companies, I think as a new CEO coming into that type of environment, you have to ask yourself, was the founder involved in that decision-making process to bring me on? Were they part of the interview process? All of our founders in our companies, if we make the decision together to bring on a CEO or for them to take a different role, they have full veto rights over the CEO hire. And That's something that we do every time. So you have to, ideally, as a new CEO in that type of a situation, you want to be in front of a town hall meeting with that founder with his or her arm around you saying, here's Valeria, she's our new CEO. I chose her. We're going to take this company to new levels together. She's done this, and that, and has tremendous amount of experience in the space. Because if the employees get a whiff of any animosity or acrimony that you were forced down that founder's throat by the PE firm, it's just a recipe for, uh, uh, attrition and discontent within the organization. So, but coming into that business as a new CEO, PE founders, PE backers, I have to say that private equity, and I talk about this in the book. Private equity thrives on transparency and trust, and you don't get the latter without the former. So, as a new CEO, you may have an investor that shows up once a quarter for board meetings, and you don't see them again. Well, good for you, but you're being shortchanged. Set up a weekly call on Fridays, a standing call with your investor deal team, and to just check in, that continuum of communications, to check in, share any organizational updates, any business updates, any decisions that need to be made that you may need their advice or counsel. Keep the lines of communication open with a vehicle like that. Board meetings, a few days before a board meeting, distribute a deck, call up your independent board members, call up your private equity board members, and share with them some of the key decisions you expect to be made at the board meeting. Any negative news, you never want to share bad news for the first time at a board meeting. So stay in front of that. Also, subtle but important point, grow a thick skin. Accept and welcome feedback and critique. You may be in a situation where you're being critiqued by someone who you feel isn't worthy to tie your shoes. Well, that may be the case, but suck it up, serve outcomes and not egos. And it's really important that, of course, you can have intelligent debate, but don't ever let it become emotional. It's interesting. I just want to share this anecdote from my book. We talk about being a new CEO and this type of an environment. And every year we have our CEO summit where we bring in all of our CEOs across our portfolio, and we have guest speakers. Each company talks about their business. There's opportunities for collaboration. We go through different market segments, and it's a great day, a full day. And at the end of this is memorable for me. At the end of one of these days, a new CEO, she asked the question when we were wrapping up. She said, if you guys look at over your 30 plus years of investing in this sector, what advice would you give me as a new CEO? We're all qualified, or else we wouldn't be here. But what advice would you give me as a new CEO to be successful in one of your businesses? And one of my colleagues beat me to the punch, and he said, the advice I would give you, gut feel advice, is that in the boardroom for board meetings, when you're surrounded by your investors and board members, and in your weekly staff meetings when you're surrounded by your executive leadership team, don't ever let there be a big elephant in the room. Run that elephant down, chase it to ground, and also, just as importantly, don't let there be a herd of little elephants, because they can also stomp on and kill you. It's really good advice to just be, especially with your team, investors and executives. It should never be us versus them. It should only be us. Them should be the competition. So that was really sage advice, and it still resonates with me many years later.
I think that's really great advice for everyone listening. So now, what does a typical acquisition timeline look like from first conversation to close? In your experience, what factors tend to accelerate or slow down the process? What are the non-negotiables for you during an acquisition?
Yeah. No, another great question. follow up on timeline, but you know, where where things can go astray, or what we call, I refer to in the book as third rail issues. Because these companies that we invest in, at least the founder is sort of a nucleus behind the culture of the business. That you know for us, if we can't get aligned with the founder on sharing control and investment thesis, the strategy and tactics behind achieving the investment thesis, then that's a non-starter for us. Other sort of knockout factors on deals that we look at, and Valeria, we look at almost 300 deals a year, and maybe in a good year we'll make 2 or 3 platform investments. We'll do all sorts of add-on acquisitions, but there's such a tremendous amount of discipline that goes along with this. So other areas that sort of watch outs for us, if there's if it's a fragmented market with no clear path to consolidation or a constrained TAM, that's an issue. If we see price erosion or margin erosion, customer concentration, customer attrition, employee attrition, and no sustainable clear right to win. Those are all issues that will take us sideways away from a deal. In terms of non-negotiables, again, I kind of come back to the founder. If the founder and or any executive leadership team members want to walk away day one and sell 100% of their equity, that's not going to work for us. Another area that's kind of nuanced is we like to call, as part of our diligence, we really like to call customers, and that comes really later in the process, and not because we're trying to have a gotcha of any sort. It's just really to try to understand, and present ourselves as a partner to the management team, an investor that's going to help take the company, increase the level of service, and take the company to a new level of professionalization, and to understand, are there opportunities to go deeper with business with the existing customer? Are there areas where the company could improve its service or product? And so very often, as you can imagine, this is a point of contention a little bit. It's a bit like a tug of war on getting access to customers. It can be, and we like to at least speak to the top 10 plus. And if we can't do that, that's a real problem. I can share with you one anecdote. One of our companies, a company called Unislink, when we were in the diligence process for Unislink, they do front to back end revenue cycle management services for physician practices. When we were doing diligence on Unislink, we got to that point in diligence, which was really close to the end of wanting to speak to customers. And to our surprise, the co-founders said to us, we have here's a list of 130 customers. Call whoever you want. Here's all the contact information. So, if we were just checking performance, we wouldn't have to call anybody at that point with how open they were and transparent they were. But it's just that was a nice to see. Your question with respect to timelines, I guess, if we're dealing with an investment banker-led process, very often, these are very structured processes where, you have a certain amount of time after you receive the SIM to submit an indication of interest, after which, it may be 2 weeks, after which the investment, if you get selected, the investment banker sets up management meetings, which can take, it can take 30 days for calendars, for depending on how many private equity firms they're going to have in the mix. And then once you reach the letter of intent stage, it's typically a 60-day timeline to close after that. So, 90 days plus or minus from first meeting or first introduction or receiving the SIM to closing is pretty typical in an investment banker-led process. Depending on how prepared the company is, it can go quicker. For proprietary deals, I spend a lot of my time in proprietary deal origination, where I'm seeking out and networking to founders of companies that may be attractive to us. And Honestly, that can take a very long time in terms of, when they're ready, from that first conversation. We have a deal under LOI right now where I met the founders in 2023, and just established a relationship over some time, until they felt comfortable, and we were the first call that they made. So, once you get to an LOI with a proprietary deal, the timeline is similar to close. It's typically 60 days. It can be less, but that's typically the landscape in which we play.
When multiple buyers are in play, how do you differentiate yourself? Beyond valuation, what makes Riverside stand out as the right partner for founders?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, first of all, right off the top, I mean, being in this space for 37 years, having been through 6 funds, um, you know, um, it kind of we have one of the most experienced investment professional teams in lower middle market healthcare private equity. But I think this is your question, kind of is right over the plate for my role, and I kind of come back to that whole fact of transparency and trust, and building the trust. Kind of advocating for who the founders or the management team are going to want to be partnered with for the next 3, 4, 5+ years. And I approach it where you have to show that you can add outsized value, especially if you're thinking about that second bite out of the apple for founders or management teams. The companies have to be better because of my engagement, my involvement. And I kind of look at it as in two buckets. One is really nuanced and subjective in differentiation for what my role kind of brings, and the other is really objective and roll up your sleeves. For me, I really try to, if I try to get in front of the founders one-on-one, or the management team one-on-one during the early stages of diligence, when they're meeting with many private equity firms. And if I can get in front of them and kind of share my journey, my background, the value creation levers that I kind of bring to the table in my role at Riverside, 30-person healthcare advisory board that I lead today, that I was part of for 5 years before I joined the company. Very often, by the time they get to the 8th or 9th or 10th private equity firm that they're meeting with, sort of like looking for a house. By the time you get to, if you're cramming through a weekend of looking for homes, by the time you get to the 9th or 10th one, you've forgotten the first few. Well, I can guarantee you, if they meet with me early on, they're not going to forget me. And oftentimes, we'll win a deal not because we're the highest bidder, but because of the fact that we're the folks that they want to spend the next several years with, and who they feel they can get the highest return from in the secondary and in a second liquidity event. And over 30 years, there's not too many landmines that I haven't stepped on in as an operator in the lower middle market. So really stressing the trusted confidant that I can be, that we can be with them and moving forward. And sometimes it's baby steps, but I really try to build a relationship where they can come to me, management can come to me at any point with issues that they're facing, challenges, and I'm not going to wave the red flag and say the sky is falling to my colleagues. We'll work through it together. And of course, if it's a major crisis, we're going to circle the wagons together to solve it. But to build that trust, again, I kind of come back to the us versus them, where there's no them. It's just us as a team building value together, moving forward. So really paint the picture of how we interact, how I interact from an organizational behavior standpoint. More on the objective side, very often, since I really enjoy the business development aspect of the journey together, I'll find myself, I'm invited to the weekly business development team meetings. I'll share this with the founders, with the management teams when we're differentiating ourselves, and I'll bring to bear, we'll interrogate the pipeline, and I'll bring to bear these connections, these resources, our healthcare advisory board, my 30 years, to come in over the top for those large opportunities and advocate for the company on a C-level basis to help position the company to win the opportunity. We'll open doors at new logos for the business to provide warm introductions. I can point to tens of millions of dollars of new business that we've won for with our portfolio companies in this fashion. If you want to differentiate yourself, show how you're going to move the needle on revenue for the business. Show how you're going to build value, and not just be a messenger, be a translator. So that's key for us.
I like how you mentioned that you guys move as a whole team. That's critical, and that's also something that founders also need to consider. On a similar note, from your perspective, who are the critical team members or advisors founders need for a successful tech M&A transaction?
Yeah, I don't mean to do a commercial for investment bankers, but I really think, the founders do a great job in what they do, building the company, taking it to a certain level. How many times have they sold a company, right? And it's what's the saying that a lawyer that represents themselves has a fool for a client. I would say hire an advisor, investment banker, someone who can position the narrative for the company, create a competitive tension, manage the diligence, shepherd the process through from LOI to close, and really be that point person, that point entity for negotiations. Take the founder out of it. Also, I think being surrounded by independent board members with real M&A reps, if you will, advisors who've been through it before, the board members, that can provide an objective perspective, pressure test the decisions and help you avoid any missteps, and also, a scalable leadership team, having operators that can run the business. You've been the hero operator oftentimes as founder, but having that bench strength to really be able to day one after the investment to be able to hit the ground running and not have to further build out the team with folks with scalable experience. Have that ready and locked and loaded before a transaction. It would be a best case scenario.
Integrating teams, culture, and technology is often where the real work begins. What are the biggest integration challenges you see post-close, and how can leaders better prepare for them?
So important. We do all sorts of, as I mentioned, we do all sorts of add-on acquisitions and integrations across our portfolio. And I can say, and I've been part of it as an operator too in my previous lives, but integration success it's really won before the deal closes, and there are really two buckets, right? There's the operational component of it, and then there's the culture and talent, the people component of it. From an operational perspective, pre-close, you should form, where I've seen most successful is when we form these cross-functional teams, these cross-functional integration task forces, if you will, that have preset, integration milestones, timelines, responsibilities. That's all, ready to go before we close the deal. Post-close, it should be about, execution, management, and delivery to those objectives. There's a tremendous amount of rigor behind it, and there should be a point person, that wakes up in the morning with this mission, someone assigned ultimately to the success of the integration from an operational standpoint. Culture and talent, that really determines if the deal works, right? I mean, if missing here is a bigger risk than missing milestones from an operational standpoint. And you have to identify sort of mission critical staff early in the process. That you have folks that have that have aligned incentives, that have the vehicles for communication. That there's an emphasis on clarity of decisions and who's actually in charge on day one. And the leaders of the organizations, they have to define the governance, the roles, and the operational model before day one. So it's a multi-pronged approach, but from operations and from culture, there's just being proactive, being prepared, no ambiguity. That's what's really, really important. I've seen, at least, to overcome these challenges and to make sure it gets done right.
To wrap up, for founders and executives considering a tech M&A journey. Based on your experience and the lessons from your book, what's some advice you could give to founders to make their companies more attractive or help them navigate the M&A process successfully?
Yeah. I kind of come back to with the positioning the company in the best light in terms of having professionalization, that the management team in place, a scalable leaders in place that can demonstrate the business can grow without being founder dependent. Having the growth levers ironed out, organic, inorganic, having that, showing that durable differentiation. Buyers pay for depth of team and succession confidence, and I think in terms of also management control systems, I mentioned, CRM systems, ERP systems, KPI dashboards, being able to have, showing credibility with forecasting accuracy, margin visibility, and, that operating discipline. That's going to be really, really important. And the advice also back to the representation, how you're representing the company to the market. And I would absolutely strongly suggest having an advisor, either an individual advisor, help represent you and take you through this thorn bush that these deal diligence can become, or a real professional investment banker who's been there, who has experience in the space, who can help really source potential acquirers that you had no idea existed, and go down that path.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time today.
It was great. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us today. Are you considering selling your tech company? Head over to quorumgroup.com, our tech exit sponsor. If you'd like to learn more about selling your tech company, join us at one of our Tech M&A Masterclass events. Attendees of the Tech M&A Masterclass will gain practical knowledge on how to achieve the maximum valuation for their company gained through expert-guided workshops, hands-on exercises, and M&A case studies, or online through our virtual conference and webcasts. Head over to WFS.com for more details. We'll see you again for the next episode.